Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Lean In Olympia. My name is Corey Passons. I'm here with Interfaith Works. Interfaith Works is a social justice nonprofit located here in Olympia, Washington. We serve Thurston County. We're a coalition of 30 plus diverse faith congregations and affiliated organizations, and we're one of the region's largest social service providers to vulnerable adults experiencing homelessness. This is our bi-weekly podcast that features conversations at the crossroads of humanity, justice, and belief. And if you want to check out past episodes or stay up to date with the work that Interfaith Works is doing, please go to our website at interfaith-works.org, or check out the Interfaith Works Facebook page or YouTube channel. And this podcast is also on Spotify. So lots of ways to stay connected with a lot of the great work that we're doing here at Interfaith Works. And it's my joy today to welcome two guests, Jamal Rahman and Jen Friedman. Greetings to both of you.
Thank you. Greetings to you.
Glad you're here. Hi, thank you. And all of you'll each have a chance to say where you're coming from today to this call. But the reason why we're here together today is because you are both amazing people, and I'm glad to be in your presence in Zoom. And also, the three of us will be sitting on a panel together next month at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. The Parliament is really an international gathering of practitioners from a diverse spectrum of religious beliefs and traditions. And we will gather to have a chance to celebrate each other's traditions, to learn, to think about issues of social justice and other issues that are pressing on our world today through a religious and spiritual lens. So that will be in Chicago, August 14th through the 18th. And I'm very excited to go. This will be the first time I've been to a parliament. And Jamal Rahman and Jen Friedman, our guests today, the three of us will be on a panel that's talking about interfaith ministry in a postmodern world. So we're going to get to what all that could mean. What is interfaith ministry? How are the three of us doing that in different ways? But what ways do we share in the work that we're doing respectively? So I'll do a brief introduction and then I'll turn it back to you all, and you can amend anything I say in your bio here. But Jen, we'll start with you. Your bio. Jen is an interfaith music minister, chaplain, and spiritual leader. She holds a Master of Divinity from the Iliff School of Theology in Denver and serves as a hospital chaplain at 2 Northern Colorado hospitals. Jen is an accomplished musician and leads sacred song and dance at retreats and workshops around the world. Jen serves as the executive director for Dances of Universal Peace North America and is a dance leader and mentor in the Universal Sufi tradition, which uses sacred phrases, chants, music, and movements from the world's wisdom traditions to promote peace, unity, connection, collaboration, and is founded in the vision of Murshid Samuel Lewis. Jamal Rahman is a popular speaker on Islam, Sufi spirituality, and interfaith relations. He is co-founder and a Muslim Sufi minister at the Interfaith Community Sanctuary in Seattle, and a former co-host of Interfaith Talk Radio, and travels nationally and internationally, presenting at retreats and workshops. He's the author of many books, including his latest, The Teachers of Spiritual Wisdom, Gaining Perspective on Life's Perplexing Questions, which is co-authored by Duncan Ferguson and Mary Patrina Boyd. Jamal's passion lies in interfaith community building. He remains rooted in his Islamic tradition and cultivates spaciousness by being open to the beauty and wisdom of other faiths. Thanks to both of you for being here. And I wanted to just begin by getting to know each of you. If we, for the viewers, if we could get to know you, and if you could tell us about your journey. Where are you from? What were some of the early influences in your own spiritual path? And Jen, maybe would you like to begin today by sharing with us where you're from and a bit of your story?
I am from Illinois originally, but I live now in Colorado. And I was raised in a very happy, proud Swedish Lutheran family that you might envision if you remember a Prairie Home Companion on
Okay.
National Public Radio. That was a lot of what I experienced as a child. And we went to church. I went particularly with my grandparents, and always felt a sense of strong connection to the divine. I experienced pretty early on what I would call kind of a schism within my church community. And it was a matter of justice, really. And so it opened my way of thinking up to the divisions that exist, between people within the same religion and people who practice other faith traditions. So that was kind of the entry point to thinking about something different. And so I began exploring and learning about other traditions and became just enamored with the learning and the curiosity, and then also having deep connections with what I would call mystery and source, and God, which I believe to be love, ultimately. And I'm also a musician, so music has played a central role in my life, all of my life. And so I also became really interested in studying the music and the words and the melodies and the phrases of other traditions. And so that was a big part of my spiritual formation, was this experience of music and singing the names of the divine and having that holy mystical experience as a way of celebrating all of the traditions and the unity that exists between them all. So that's kind of the early years. And then I was actually traveling as a folk musician in Colorado in my early 20s. And that's when I discovered the dances of universal peace. So that's a large part of my spiritual practice today. And so now I'm a leader in that tradition. And it, brings us together singing and honoring all of the traditions, the wisdom traditions of the world. And I think it's a really beautiful opportunity for other people to learn, about traditions that aren't their home tradition, and also to help bring about a sense of unity, working towards peace and justice in the world. So the dances have that beautiful ability to transcend the cultural, spiritual, faith lines.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you are not just a practitioner and a leader of dances, but you're also an executive leader for the dances at the organizational level. And so I'd like to, as we continue with our conversation, to think about the ways that you might want to share with us about how when you think about ministry in a wider sense, how do you think about sharing of the tradition of which you're tasked to foster at that level? So we'll return back to that in terms of a wider scope of ministry. But thanks for sharing that entry point to your story. I know there's always more. We could spend the whole hour and more knowing about it, but it's really good to start to get to know you. So thank you. And Jamal, we'd like to turn to you. Would you like to tell us about or at least part of your story and where you're from and some of the early formative years for you from your spiritual path?
Well, I was born in a place more than a few blocks away from here, a country called Bangladesh. And I'm a Muslim. My parents were diplomats, so I have traveled a lot. And because of that, I got access to, exposure to many houses of worship. And my parents, they come from a lineage of Sufi, that's mystical teachers and healers. And they're very open-minded, very progressive. So they send their children, me and my siblings, to visit all these houses of worship. So from an early age, I had a very wonderful feeling about other traditions. From an early age, I knew, you might say from a heart knowledge, that, interfaith is not about conversion. Interfaith is not about conversion. It's about completion, becoming a more developed, complete human being. So I always had in the back of my mind, I really want to get engaged in a career that builds community, and also it is a sort of a circle that which Rumi calls a circle of love, where we share practices, our close friends, share our joys and sorrows. So anyhow, long story short, I had an opportunity when I came to Seattle to start a community, meeting in different people's homes. In those days, no internet, but some people had small homes, some had large homes. So I began teaching classes on self-development. And I realized that's the community.
Mm.
And very soon, this was I think we started in 1992, and in 7 years, we grew to over 700 people.
Mm.
You know, huge community. We couldn't accommodate everybody, of course, because houses were big and small and medium. So we began to realize we need a center. Well, we prayed and prayed and prayed, and by grace of God, we are so grateful that a wonderful church building was just given to us for free.
Mm.
So our knees are scraped with gratitude. We renamed it Interfaith Community Sanctuary, and that's a place where we foster a living, breathing interfaith community. We're very active in any interfaith events in the city. And then when 9/11 happened, it so happened through a whole chain of circumstances that I got together with a rabbi and a pastor, and we began to do programs together. We began to be named as the Interfaith Amigos. And as Interfaith Amigos, we've been traveling the entire country, overseas, sharing a message of inclusivity.
Mm.
So that's where I am right now. And I should tell you that Rabbi Ted Falcon has retired. So we have Rabbi Laura Kaplan from Vancouver as our rabbi.
Wonderful.
So it's me, Pastor Don McKenzie, and Rabbi Laura Duhan Kaplan. We're the Interfaith Amigos. So I have two roles. One is Imam at the Interfaith Community Sanctuary,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm also one third of the Interfaith Amigos.
Okay. Wonderful.
And so our message is, all these different religions, they're all simply paths to a shared universal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think something that the three of us share is we are bi or trivocational. I think I'm here with Interfaith Works today, but I'm also presenting at the Parliament of World Religions as an interfaith practitioner. I'm a minister for an interfaith community here in Olympia, Washington, called Community for Interfaith Celebration. And the two aspects of my work are different in some way, but they each are focused on interfaith understanding and appreciation. So I think it's very interesting that the kind of like the pluralism of interfaith and the multifaceted, that's kind of been it's expressing itself in each of our like careers when you look at it that way. Coincidence? Maybe, I don't know, but I want to stay a little bit in the realm of our story before we move on a bit and ask about mentors. I think in interfaith, one of the gifts is having exposure to so many deep wisdoms and teachers. Yet a mentor is someone that comes along who has a special connection or influence in our lives. And I'm curious if each of you would want to share a mentor that has been a part of your experience in your journey.
Well, for myself, I certainly think, first and foremost of my dance mentor within the Dances of Universal Peace tradition. Mm-hmm. And his name is Bernie Heidemann. And so, that has been really a formative part of my adult years because I've spent about 17 years in relationship with him. And his core teaching is really to be in the presence and to experience the essential unity within all beings in the present moment. And so I've had a real strong experience of just being immersed in that presence that we all can tap into, that we all connect with beyond any labels or prescriptions, just simply being in our hearts. I certainly have other teachers that I love in terms of, the thinkers that I read and that I haven't met. Pema Chodron is a huge influence for me, and also Father Richard Rohr are two major influences. And of course, Hazrat Inayat Khan, the Sufi teacher, who is, the source of the universal Sufi lineage that I'm a part of. And so those are kind of my main teachers. But as far as a physical living being, that would be my dance mentor.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I would say, the Islamic mystical tradition, Sufism, your parents are your great, wonderful teachers, and also they send you to other teachers to learn from. And there is no fixed curriculum because in the mystical tradition, the teacher decides what is best, depending on the temperament, the aptitude, the level of the student. So the curriculum varies really.
Mm.
And so in my case, I would say my greatest treasured teachers were my parents, my father and my mother, primarily, and some of the teachers they sent me to. And of course, I had the good fortune of being in different countries. My father was a Middle Eastern expert, so I was absolutely, should I say, privileged that my father was posted to Iran and Turkey, where Rumi is studied with great devotion.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned the Quran through the lens of Rumi.
Mm-hmm.
So I quote Rumi quite a lot, mainly because that's how I learned many deeper insights of the Quran, as have millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say my parents, and on the other level, Maulana Rumi has been a great teacher.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's dive in for a moment for people watching. One of the aspects of the mission of Interfaith Works is social justice and peace through interfaith cooperation and understanding. So I'd like to take a moment to just, before we move into some of the specifics of the panel, I would just love to have both of you share aspects of what is Sufism to you. I think you're both walking in the Sufi tradition, but in ways that might have some distinction, or at least their own unique characteristic. Could you both speak to the way in which you understand the tradition that you're walking in? Because I think the Sufism for some people who are in more mainline traditions might not understand that expression of Islam or as an expression of universal Sufism. So could we take a moment and dive into how you would define and express the way that you walk in Sufism?
Corey, I would like to first explain what Sufism is, because it's a total
Sure.
misunderstanding, even among Muslims, actually. What is Sufism? The misunderstanding is that Sufism is a denomination within Islam. Like in Christianity, you have Catholics and Protestants. In Islam, we have Sunnis and Shia. 85% of the world's Muslims are Sunni, 15% are Shia. And that's just based on a historical dispute after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he died. What is Sufism? It's very critical to explain it's not a denomination. It's simply a heartfelt aspiration to live the spirit of the tradition. So for example, a Muslim prays 5 obligatory prayers. A very conservative Muslim might say, Jamal, if you don't do your 5 obligatory prayers, you will burn in hell. A Sufi, also a Muslim, will take a different approach. Say, Jamal, when you pray, it is as if you're attending a celestial banquet. And if you don't pray, you're simply missing out on the banquet, on the feast. That is your punishment. So it's just a different approach where they would rather not get enmeshed in theology, in rituals, which are fine, but rather in the spiritual teachings of the tradition, and most important, living it. You might say, if you have to summarize it, I would say in their understanding of, shall I say, religion, they're moving from a knowledge of the tongue to a knowledge of the heart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say this much for right now, before I
Okay.
give it over to Sister Jen.
Okay. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. I was thinking that traditionally I have told people that Sufism for me is a quality of the heart, the condition of the heart. It's not a particular name that I can call myself. It's not an initiation, and certainly not a denomination, but it's the way that I walk in the world, in which I see everything as God. So there is nothing but God. And that is how I seek to live my life, and that's how I seek to be leading when I'm and serving. When I'm serving people, when I'm leading amongst people, that is the way in which I hope to be.
Mm-hmm.
So there really is nothing, only God. And so my job is just to remember, is just to remove any obstacles to my own remembering. And sometimes those are confusions and possibly delusions and illusions. And I forgive myself for that. And I remember, and I always have this opportunity to remember that that's the way that I'm, that I live as a human in this world, which is just a vessel of love for the one God, which is everywhere, which is everything.
Jen, in the Quran, there's a revelation that says, every somewhere you turn is the face of Allah. Every somewhere you turn is the face of Allah. So that really is universal in a sense. It's all the face of Allah. Another verse in the Quran says, Allah says, we are closer to you than your jugular vein. We are closer to you than your jugular vein. So we all have access to God. It's a question of another verse, I think, which reflects what you were saying, Jennifer. In the Quran, it says, truly in the remembrance of God do hearts find peace. In the remembrance, that's zikr, remembering God. And God, whatever your definition or understanding of God is to remember God through God's divine qualities of oneness, love, compassion, forgiveness, all those divine traits.
So from what I'm hearing from you both, the way that you're sharing Sufism with us today is as a level of experience of unity, and that can be expressed through a specific tradition, but it's a type of experience, a type of connection, a way of being.
Yes, exactly. I tell you what the confusion is. There are different kinds of Sufis. Some Sufis, you might say the conservative Sufis, they will say, Jamal, to be a Sufi, you've got to be a Muslim. So that causes some confusion because you have people in the West here, I'm a Christian and a Sufi. I'm a Buddhist Sufi. Or I'm a Jufu, I'm a Jewish Sufi. See? So how do you explain that? So you ask a progressive Sufi or a Sufi who's open-minded, can a non-Muslim become a Sufi? And a Sufi never answers directly, you see. They will say it's like this, a Muslim, how does a Muslim pray? A Muslim puts his prayer rug and points in the direction of the Kaaba. That's the house of God, symbolic house of God in Mecca. Now, what if you're so advanced, you're so wonderful, you're so integrated that your prayer rug now is inside the Kaaba? So now does it matter in which direction you point the prayer rug? It doesn't. So that answers anybody can be a Sufi as long as one is doing the work of becoming what is called Insan-e Kamil, becoming a more perfected, completed human being, becoming more Christ-like, Buddha-like, Elohim-like, through any modality, becoming more complete as a human being and being of service to God's creation. That fulfills our purpose, no matter what your religious belief or no religion at all. That by itself is a belief, spiritual but not religious. Being a more complete human being, that's called the inner inconvenient work we all avoid. And being, as Rumi says, being a lamp, a lifeboat, or a ladder to God's creation. If I'm doing that, I'm a Sufi.
And Jen, you've named universal Sufism. Could you share with us that particular expression of what we've been hearing about from what Sufism is and how that's extrapolated and expressed in your life?
Yeah, and that's a term that has been coined coming from the lineage of Hazrat Inayat Khan, which is the foundation of the Dances of Universal Peace tradition. I don't think that I'm hearing anything different from what Jamal is sharing, but of course I would just say that there's a phrase from Hazrat Inayat Khan in which he says, I am a Buddhist as much as I am a Jew, as much as I am a Christian, as much as I am a Muslim. So, I take that to mean that's the universal aspect that, we're really just expressions of the one unity, which is the divinity. And so, of course, it's a universal tradition that we share.
Mm-hmm. And that Murshid Samuel Lewis was a practitioner in the Berkeley area and began to develop the dances in the 1960s. What was his connection? Was he a direct disciple of Hazrat Inayat Khan?
He did study with Hazrat Inayat Khan. I don't know the particular years of that, as far as I understand. But he also studied in the Zen tradition and, of course, was raised Jewish. And then also studied with Ruth St. Denis, who was a modern a dancer, a pioneer in the modern dance movement.
Mm-hmm. And from
so
there,
he had this beautiful blending of all these traditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he was the originator of the Dances of Universal Peace. Then
that's right.
Yeah.
So he received that inspiration that if the world would eat, dance, and pray together, that we would have peace. And he began to have these visions of the dances and groups of people coming together to do these simple, moving meditations together with the goal of understanding and interfaith harmony so that we would have peace in the world.
Yeah. I love it. I'm smiling because just this morning I had the good fortune of working with a regional Olympia-based dance leader to offer some dances for some children that are in an interfaith summer camp that's being hosted at Temple Beth Hapilo here in Olympia. And the dance leader came and we did dances from the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, and the Sufi tradition. And it was just amazing to see this leader was so skilled at really being educational to the children about what are we singing? What are we saying? What's happening? And then after the dance, how do you feel? And I was just amazed at the depth of intuitive awareness that the kids had, that they were in a space that was safe, but also that was exploratory for what is the sacred. And it was just so wonderful to see them dancing. And at one point, the dance leader goes, "Do we want to go faster or slower?" They're like, "Faster." So we just started spinning and spinning, and it was just great. So I have a whole other, a connection with the dances is something that I'll talk about more at the Parliament with you all, but I'm just really having the feeling of gratitude from the dance circle that I saw just this morning.
Beautiful,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
What a wonderful way to bring people together. Right now I'm speaking from my house here because at the sanctuary, the Interfaith Community Sanctuary, we have peace camp. Young children from different religions, different social strata, they're getting together and they're doing a lot of loud and most beautiful Bollywood music dances.
Oh my gosh.
And they love that part. I would say the most, probably getting together and adults join in, their parents join in these Bollywood dances. So, and I'm familiar with the Dance of Universal Peace. What a beautiful way. And it's all over the world to bring people together,
Yeah.
For example, we can say there's no such thing as a Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Christian silence. It's all silence. You can practice silence. Then there is music, which is loved by everybody. Doesn't mean that theology. There is good food. There is, I should say, for me, chocolates that bring people together. Silence, music,
and chocolate.
And chocolates, yes.
Yeah.
I think the beauty also of the children dancing is that we see how easily and naturally the children gravitate to the practice.
Yeah.
And it just is for us as adults coming to the practice, it's like that uncovering, that remembering of our essential nature, which we all know as children, but we tend to forget through the layers of life that we put on through all of our experiences. But when you watch the children, it is so delightful because we have that spark within us and we remember, and they just pick it right up.
Yes. And they enjoy it. That's a part of life, to enjoy life,
it.
And to have that laughter and that, that beautiful music and movement. They say in I saw a recent study of longevity. Besides having good relationships, a very important part was movement, body movement. To foster deeper happiness and increase life's longevity.
Yeah.
I also noticed with the kids too, one thing that they weren't very like protective of their own identity, and that can happen as we get more entrenched in our societal sense of
Right.
belonging. We tend to be more protective, even maybe at a subconscious level, of how we have formed or made agreements of who we are in terms of our identity socially. And so I just saw a lot of flexibility with the kids to allow like a feeling to come and have that be original and okay. And it was just really special. And I'm going to use that construct of identity to pivot into some of the topics that we're going to talk about at the Parliament in just a few weeks. Actually, the three of us are going to sit on a panel together, and we're going to discuss interfaith ministry in a postmodern world. And some of the language that describes what we're saying is based in questions. It asks, what is interfaith ministry in a postmodern world, and whom does it serve? How do interfaith ministers honor multiple traditions with authenticity and reverence? So there's a lot of other language about the panel, but those questions themselves, I think, are really central to how probably each of us function, the way we think about weekly, daily, sometimes hourly. How am I showing up in an interfaith space? What is my mission? What is my sense of ministry? So I wanted to just take a more broad stroke and ask each of you if you could define what you think interfaith ministry is, and then we can begin to look at some of the particular ways that you show up as individuals who are ministering in an interfaith setting. So who would like to begin by just responding to how do you define interfaith ministry?
Well, I think for me, it goes beyond just simply tolerating. Being an interfaith minister and being an interfaith person is about respecting, appreciating, and celebrating the Sacred Heart within all of the traditions. And so there's a natural sense of learning and curiosity for me in wanting to respect and appreciate and celebrate all of the various faith traditions that we beautifully have in this world. And for me, it's interesting. I was speaking to someone about my role as an interfaith chaplain in the hospitals. And for me, I feel I'm doing my job the best when someone has no idea what my affiliation is. And that means that I can show up and be present for them and honor and respect and celebrate their tradition, their particular tradition. And not certainly not from a place of hiding my affiliation, but just from a shared place of human connection and honoring space for their faith. So for me, that's what that feels like. Is like when I'm arriving and I can honor and I can hold space for someone and they really feel like I'm a part of their tradition. That to me is very, that's kind of the meaning of being an interfaith minister.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. That's a beautiful way to segue into something that I always want to say, repeat what Mahatma Gandhi said, who knew a lot about what it takes to create peace in a multi-religious society. And he would say two or three things. Number one was, he would say it is the sacred duty of every individual to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. Mark the words. It's not just a nice thing. It's a sacred duty. And to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. That's number one. I don't have to know everything in detail, but I must know something about the other person's religion in an appreciative way. Number two, he said, every religion has truths and untruths. Yes, my revelations are divine, but my mind, when it interprets the revelation, my mind is less than divine. So the understanding can be less than divine. Let's be honest about that. So there are different interpretations of the same text in everybody's religion. Number three, he would say, if a religious extremist does something wrong, he would say, I beg you, I implore you, do not criticize this person's religion. Rather, point out to this person insights and verses of beauty and wisdom from this person's own tradition. That is the way to create peace. But this presupposes I know something about the other person's tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly, I want to say, in our house of worship, that is a foundation of what we do to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be interfaith?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's nice to talk about it, to have dialogue, but we say we want to live it.
Mm-hmm.
So in our house of worship, we meet every day. Of course, every Sunday we have worship services, and we foster a living, breathing community. And I would just say two things are critical, no matter what your religion. I love what Jen said. It's not a question of acknowledging our religious differences or respecting them and honoring them. It's about celebrating them.
Mm-hmm.
That is the key. But 2 points are very important. One is, doesn't matter what your religion, let's help one another to really share practices that makes me a more complete human being, more Christ-like, Buddha-like, Elohim-like, Allah-like, Krishna-like. So we share spiritual practices. And the reason and the focus is to really raise our consciousness. That is critical. That's number one. And number two is, let's join hands and be of service to God's creation.
Mm-hmm.
And we can be of greater, deeper service to God's creation if I am more evolved as a human being. Doesn't matter what practices I use. So those two things are very critical.
Yeah. So we've already started to see a pretty wide spectrum of how interfaith can present in the world. I mean, Jamal, the final note that you were talking about is in the context of a spiritual community, a community that gathers around practices and shared practices. And Jen, you shared with us about spiritual ministry as a way of being respectful and appreciative and supportive of coming into spaces of care and need for people in chaplaincy roles. And yet I'll add yet another dimension to how interfaith ministry can show up, which is where the work that we do at Interfaith Works, where we have a coalition of diverse faith communities that want to come together to do social justice work. So the delegates from these communities, they gather, one of the things we've decided that's critical, that's foundational for our work together, is that we need to know each other. We need to know who we are, what we're bringing into the space, and not just the tradition, like as a thing you just set down as a binder of facts about my tradition, but who am I that in that tradition. So we take time at each meeting for people to share their individual stories of how they've walked through their tradition. Because I mean, I know for myself, it's been a journey and a struggle sometimes staying in my tradition with fidelity and wanting to grow and be authentic. And that whole story is unique, even though I'm under the moniker of a specific tradition. So there's so many different ways that interfaith shows up. And as our world becomes more plural, as we're sharing and seeing all facets of the world, we're also noticing that the world is a beautiful just prism of colors and reflections. So interfaith ministry has so much to help us with to understand each other. So as you look into that space that I'm kind of describing right here, let's go to the second question that we ask ourselves here in our panel. Whom does it serve? Whom does interfaith serve?
It serves the world. I want to pick up on the point you mentioned, Corey, about connecting with the other. We live in a world of polarization, whether it's race or culture or religion. Polarization. I mean, you see it all around, all over the world, actually.
Yeah.
We're talking about religion. Let's say religion. So how do we resolve that? And as a Muslim, I'm very sensitive to that because, I face that quite often, Islamophobia. So how do you resolve Islamophobia? And for that matter, anti-Semitism or homophobia or, bias against women. So the key is what you mentioned. And this, I personally take a verse from the Quran, which has really gone all over the world after 9/11. Even Muslims are surprised it's in the Quran. Some Muslims, because they never focused on it, where it says in the Quran that if Allah wanted, Allah could have made all of us one single community.
Mm-hmm.
But He chose to create diversity. And the main reason is so you might come to know the other on a human level.
Mm.
So the key is, for me, interfaith ministry is, even before talking about religion or theology, is to come to know the other on a human level. If I do that, and that, by the way, that's the hardest thing to do, because I have to be sincere, I have to be genuine. This work requires a lot of persistence. We know this from our work with the Interfaith Amigos. But if you do that, it doesn't matter what the polarization issue is. I can no longer dehumanize or demonize the other, because there already is a human connection.
Mm-hmm.
As a Muslim, as I said, I'm very sensitive because, there's a lot of polling in different states where they don't like Muslims. But when they go deeper, they find that a person who says, no, I'm okay with Muslims, they can build mosques in my state. Who are those people? They say they know at least one Muslim personally.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones who said, these are terrible people, they're all terrorists. You ask them, do you know any Muslim? No, I don't know any Muslim personally. So the personal connection is critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, once we come to understand one another, and we do that through sharing practices and sharing traditions and talking with one another and working with one another, that's how we raise above the separation and the distinctions that divide us. Because at the core, we are all human, and we all have the same needs, ultimately.
Yes.
And we all have the same longing to have meaning in our lives and to experience love and to be safe. And those are universal values that we all certainly share. And I think, that's the true gift of interfaith, is that that's what we're doing when we do this work, is that we're really just holding space for the humanness and the shared connection, which ultimately leads to justice and peace in our world. Because we know when we understand and we know someone in a deeper way on a human level, then it's much easier to love them and much harder to, separate ourselves from them.
Mm-hmm. One of the areas of success has been Habitat for Humanity. People from different religions getting together and building homes. Mm-hmm. People who are very different. I mean, I've had evangelical Christians who actually don't like Muslims, but once they came together to build a home, working together, like you said, Jen, for a social cause, and the house actually was being built for a Muslim family. Mm-hmm. Mm. They were okay with that. So that coming together in service for a social cause can have a deep impact.
Yeah. My hope is that any person who's going to be a religious or spiritual leader takes great care with thinking about the way that they function in the tradition. And I hope that for all interfaith practitioners as well, that they're very mindful and intentional. And I wanted to ask each of you, how can interfaith ministry function in a way that is truly respectful and operating with reverence and yet with authenticity as it seeks to operate in diverse traditions, sometimes in one space together? How does a person share practices, for example, in a way that truly honors the tradition that's being centralized at the moment? And certainly, Jen, in the dances, there are sometimes in a dance circle, you might encounter 2 to 3 to 4 different traditions referenced in an hour and a half dance circle. That's a lot. And so how do you personally hold a sense of, responsibility or integrity as you operate among different religious expressions and traditions?
Well, I think first and foremost, the way of being is very important. So coming to it with a sense of honoring and respect for the tradition is really important. So honoring the source material, whatever that particular tradition is, and whatever is, whatever sacred phrase is being sung or shared in that moment, having a sense of, its rootedness in the context of that tradition and being able to speak to that. And we usually call that attunement in the Dances of Universal Peace. We share an attunement to what the sacred phrase is and why we're actually using this as our practice. So I think that part is very important. And then, having humility. This is a living tradition as well. So I think, there's always the potential for mistakes. And I think that coming to it with a sense of humility and just honoring that here's my, my understanding and my education, my knowledge regarding this, but also, I'm not always going to get it 100% right. But I seek to understand, and I seek to, that's my intention, is to honor it with that capacity that I have, and to be, learning and growing as I go. So,
yeah.
If I may just add to that, particularly in interfaith programs in the Abrahamic traditions, Jews, Christians, Muslims, there's a very common complaint that they get together on just certain occasions, Christmas, Seder, Ramadan. And in those times, the conversation, the behavior is, quote unquote, absurdly nice. But when they go home, Muslims become terrorists, Jews become occupiers, Christians become liars, unless, and this is the key, something we've been referring to, if those groups don't meet just occasionally and only ceremoniously, but they continue to develop relationships, friendships, that is when transformation, change, learning occurs. So for example, the biggest problem in the Abrahamic interfaith ministry has been the issue of Israel-Palestine, the elephant in the room. Everything is, what do they say in America, honky-dory, till there's an eruption in the Middle East. Then everybody separates. However, this happened at 9/11, but some Muslims and Jews and some Christians, they continued to get together, converse, talk honestly with vulnerability about the elephant in the room, the Israel-Palestine issue. And guess what? It has led to Jewish Voices for Peace, J Street Lobby, which is actually having a big impact on public policy. It has emerged from that interfaith ministry of getting together again and again and again, not just occasionally, but very often. And there's a problem, I should tell you, we should not gloss over problems about interfaith, especially in the religions of Christianity and Islam, because there's a tendency within both religions to share the good news. So how do you reconcile that with interfaith work? This is something we've been exploring for a long time, and there are all kinds of different solutions, but it is an issue. Do you want to proselytize when you do in interfaith events? I was asking one big group in California, what do you do when you do interfaith work? Very involved in interfaith, a big mosque. Basically, before they go to an interfaith event, they gather everybody together and say, when you go to this interfaith event, absolutely no proselytizing. Just as an example, but we have to confront these issues also.
Creating a safe container where people feel like they can show up and not be obligated to have some kind of a, proposal put on them by another person or tradition. Yeah, it's a key premise, I think, of coming together and being able to fully be safe and within oneself. Yeah. I'm curious if you would each share what you think about the relationship between interfaith, how it might be different than universalism, or how you might define something as being universal versus interfaith. How do you think about those two things?
Go ahead, Jen.
Well, I think they're certainly connected because we really are talking about the universal themes of being human, which I shared about earlier. So we have the great, spiritual qualities of forgiveness and gratitude and compassion and loving kindness. And I think those are shared universal values and norms and needs. I think universalism kind of has that, as well as interfaith, but interfaith is more looking at it from the particular. So that's kind of how I see that. Universalism is more of a a spiritual kind of philosophy that isn't tethered per se to those particular traditions, whereas the interfaith brings in those particular rituals and practices and teachings that are unique to each tradition.
Yeah.
I would also add, Jen, of course, I'm not very familiar, the term universalism. By the way, Corey, is that the same as interspirituality? Because that is what the issue is.
No, I would say it's different. I would say universalism would be an expression that indicates a sense of a spirituality or a teaching as it exists outside of the particulars of a tradition itself.
You mean
love,
like
love, for example, extrapolated like a concept such as love or
I see.
peace, and how that can be, and how that's distinct from focusing on such concepts like that versus a particular path of interfaith.
Like, for example, Rumi has this saying about, you mentioned love. Rumi says, love is in every religion, but love has no religion. So I would say that in every religion, there exists divine attributes. For example, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. When we were the Interfaith Amigos, we'd go and talk and make presentations. We would say all our teachings overlap those universal qualities. However, each religion has emphasis on a particular divine quality. So Ted Falcon, my rabbi brother, would say, in Judaism, the core teaching is oneness. My Christian friend would say, in Christianity, it's unconditional love. In Islam, I would say, because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said it, it's compassion. But this exists in all the traditions. I think if I understand what universalism is, it's just a question of living those values, those teachings. Interfaith is more about dialogue, about connecting, which is absolutely critical. And I think universalism and interspirituality is taking those divine qualities which exist really in all the traditions. It's a question of living them. Oneness, love, compassion, forgiveness, graciousness, generosity, being of service. This is in all the traditions, which is separate from theology.
Yes.
But the hard thing is to live it, to practice it, rather than debate it.
Yeah. And I mean, we each exist as humans, and we're gifted, and there's beauty and amazing talents and from each human being, and we're also limited. Each human being is limited, and so we each have to offer ourselves to each other to form a whole, to form community. And I think, to me, interfaith is about recognizing limitations, maybe speaking to the ways that it's a one human being. If you want to take religion as a human, it's a one human being, and it's in a community with other human beings that each have their own gifts and expressions. And oftentimes, what we find is that in our community, when we gather as an interfaith community through Interfaith Works, we've spent time exploring what are some values that are held between and among our religious traditions. And we've found an incredible similarity of values,
right?
Compassion and wanting to be non-judgmental and seeking the other and community. And so we found all of these deep movements, these tidal movements below the waves, that actually energize and influence the way we function. But then we go forth in the specific traditions that offer us a way to practice and a way to do that.
Corey, I might add this from what you're saying about universalism, which is a very favorite topic of mine. Community. We all need community. We all need a circle of love. A wall standing alone is useless. Add to it other walls. You can support a roof, even a granary. But here is an important point. In the past, let me take Islam. The focus on community was the Ummah, Muslims. Jamal, your friends' circle of love is Muslims. Oh, you can make it global, the global Ummah. But now, as decades have passed, and Rumi had said this in the 13th century, mystics have said it, that the real community is based not on outer similarities, but on inner similarities, kinship of spirit. So in a multi-religious society, I might be a Muslim, but my best friend might be a Christian or a Buddhist or spiritual but not religious. And this is happening more and more.
Yes.
There was a recent Pew Research asking Muslims in America, who is your best friend? Somebody you really rely on. And over 40%, I think well over 40% said it's a non-Muslim. And that's great. To me, that's universalism.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to offer us a practice right now, which is that we're coming up close to an hour, which is how long we'll have in in Chicago at the Parliament. And there's so much more to cover, but we will take a little more time here. One thing I do as towards the end of each episode is to ask a bit about hope and how you define hope and where you're seeing or experiencing hope in the world today. So I wanted to give each of you a chance to comment on hope. But before we do that, before we turn to that, I just want to express gratitude to each of you as well. I know that in the day-to-day of interfaith ministry, there can be sometimes a sense of yearning for a wider sense of understanding of what interfaith work is. Sometimes there can be a sense of confusion. Jamal, you've referenced some of this from people as they look into interfaith ministry, not understanding what it's trying to accomplish or do. So taking time today to talk about the way that we've experienced it and the way that we see it as an offering to the world for places of connection and appreciation and respect. I just really thank you for taking time to share from what you're doing, but also beyond that, I want to thank you for the continued work that each of you are doing in your respective fields. So thank you. I feel very happy to have been with you today, and I really look forward to seeing you in person in a couple weeks in Chicago. Yeah.
Thank you.
So with that said, I want to return to the closing offering, which is this concept of hope and where you're seeing or feeling hope in the world today, and how you'd share with us the way that you understand hope or see it.
Well, I just want to share that coming together at the Parliament of the World's Religions is hugely hopeful. I attended the 2015 and 2018 parliaments, and I really had never seen anything like this. And I think this growing recognition that we're all in it together, that we have this web of mutuality, this interdependence, and, we're coming together to talk about the critical issues of our time, and recognizing that we need to care for creation. We need to care for each other. And the only way we can do that is to begin talking to each other and working together and learning. And so the Parliament, to me, is very inspiring. You can walk in any direction and see any number of people who, probably represent a multitude of faith traditions, a multitude of cultural traditions. And they're talking about, how do we address these issues of our time? How do we address trafficking of women and climate change? And we don't have all the answers, but we know the questions, and we know that we need to work together. So that in and of itself, to me, is just really gives me a lot of hope that we can come together and that we can do this as a world community and transcend our divisions. In the kind of micro level, every day when I'm working in a hospital, I experience hope just interacting with patients and families and staff, and seeing the level of care that people have for one another. It's really, for me, it gives me a lot of hope that, I've been working as a hospital chaplain for 7.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe I could count on one hand how many times someone has asked me what my religion is.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen very often,
Mm-hmm.
which to me tells me that the simple quality of my humanness
Mm-hmm.
and being present with the person is really what's the most important thing. And so, that to me is very telling. And especially when we're in the hospital, where we tend to be at the most, stress level, high stress that we've experienced.
Yeah.
So you'd expect people to be a little more fearful in terms of their interaction with others, but it's actually the opposite in my experience. I don't experience that very often, and people, regardless of their faith tradition, usually welcome me with open arms and an open heart, and we just sit and connect and share with one another and grieve and love and express hope. And so for me, that gives me a great amount of hope.
Thank you.
I have great hope also, just like Jennifer. In my lifetime, my hair is white now, but I never would have thought that in my lifetime, for example, communism would dissolve, the Berlin Wall would come down, apartheid would be dismantled, an African American would go to the White House for 2 terms. You might think it happened suddenly. No, there was a lot of undercurrent of grassroots level work that we had no idea about was happening for a long time that made this happen. Similarly, this is happening also. See, the Quran says, it is God who sends down rain when humankind has lost all hope and unfolds his grace. The earth was parched, but the waters of mercy came down, and the earth became clothed in green. It happens when the Quran says, you strive, you make the effort. The ocean takes care of every wave till it reaches shore. But when the waves get together, it can overcome continents. One last thing I want to say, how do you do this? In the Quran, Prophet Muhammad felt abandoned, helpless and hopeless. And the revelation came to the Prophet Muhammad. I'll just say those 2 things. The Quran, God said, he said, particularly in times of affliction, when you are hopeless, don't forget 2 things. According to your capacity, do your spiritual practices according to your capacity. And number 2, according to your capacity, be of service to God's creation. If you remember that, this hope will always be manifested. It might not happen with exactly what I want, but I will feel that inner peace within, and I'll feel what is called, you'll feel the handhold of God. You'll feel supported. You'll feel what Buddhists would call equanimity, tranquility, a sense of sakina in Islam, and inner peace. There's always hope.
Always hope. Well, thank you. As so often happens with me in these episodes, my hope becomes the people that are with me or before me. And that's happening with me today with both of you. Thank you for your time today. Again, our guests have been Jen Friedman and Jamal Rahman, and the 3 of us will be on a panel together in a few weeks at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago, discussing a lot of what we've talked about today in this podcast. And we'll see what else comes to the fore at that day, depending on who's in the room and asking questions of us. So I'm looking forward to that experience. And thank you so much for being here. Again, this has been Lean In Olympia. If you'd like to check out past episodes, you can subscribe on Spotify, check us out on our Facebook page or our website at interfaith-works.org, where you can stay up to date with all the things that we're doing here at Interfaith Works. So again, thanks to our guests. Peace to all of you, and be well.
See you very soon.
See you soon.
God bless.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.